Well, good morning.
Good morning.
I appreciate the invitation to your, I think, the fifth Cornerstone event at my alma mater. And I'm proud of the fact that I came here. And it was a wonderful experience for me. I want to talk to you about two subjects today that are very near and dear to me. One is Perdue. I've been there 43 years. A lot of people in this room aren't 43 years old. So it's kind of a big deal for me to have been there all that time. And I want to talk to you about agriculture, which I'm very passionate about. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to give you a brief overview of Perdue. And I think that's important because that's a Maryland-based company. It's a family-owned, 103-year-old Maryland-based company, and it's massive. When I started with the company, we were about $300 million in sales. Today, it's in the two-digit billions. So I didn't give you the number. So in case somebody asks, he said something, but he didn't give us the number. And I'm just amazed how little people know about us. So I'd like to just share that with you. And then I'm going to touch on some of the most important issues in agriculture today. I'm not going to touch on all the issues. I'm just going to touch on some of the issues, the ones that I want to talk about. I have the bully pulpit. I get to do that. And it's interesting and perfect that the dean touched on some of those issues as he spoke to you. These are big issues. These are important issues. These are about feeding people kind of issues that we need to talk about. These are about protecting our environment. So I don't think we can talk about them enough, frankly. And I'm going to ask your indulgence and forgiveness in advance for two things. Number one, I will be an unabashed spokesperson for Perdue. It will be an advertisement. Secondly, I'm going to tell you some stories from my experience. And some of these stories might offend. And I'm not setting out to be offensive, but in each case, they represent where somebody ignored the science, ignored the data, ignored the truth to match some agenda they might have. Or they failed to work for the common good. And if anyone's offended because of that, I'm apologizing in advance. But I will proceed. So, I'm the official advancer. So, Perdue is a fourth generation. The first generation was Arthur Perdue in 1920. Family-owned food and ag business, founded on a small family farm. That's important. I'll say this once and I'll say it a few more times. We raise a lot of animals. And I'll show you numbers in a minute. Every one of our animals are raised on family farms. We get a lot of criticism for being big ag. And yep, we're big. The more we made, people liked it, they wanted more. So we kept growing. So be critical for our success. But all of our animals are raised on family farms. And you're probably familiar with Perdue chicken, but there's so much more to our business. We're a diverse agricultural enterprise with operations across the U.S. And a question I might get is, well, what about overseas? We have had, over the years, several operations in different parts of the world. Moscow, China, Georgia, Zanzibar. When I was CEO, I made the decision to begin exiting all those businesses. And I wanted us to focus on the U.S. because just the business opportunities are so much greater here. You know, and we're only 7% of the U.S. poultry production. So there's just tremendous upside potential. We consider ourselves to be a continuous learning, science and fact-based organization. And we remind ourselves of that frequently. And it's critical for us to maintain that thought process in order to achieve our vision, which is to be the most trusted name in food and agricultural products. And recently, Newsweek reported that Perdue was one of America's most trustworthy companies. We didn't pay for that ad. And we do pay for a lot of ads. Today, we're a multifaceted, multi-branded company consisting of these two operating divisions. This is the food, the animal agriculture, and that's the agribusiness, that's ag commodities, soybean processing, international commodity trading, which is just a phenomenal business. So I want to take a minute and walk through some important parts of our history. It was founded in 1920. That's the farmhouse. That farmhouse still stands. A few years ago, we remodeled it. Now we use it as a place to meet. A lot of the original furniture and so forth is still there. It's right across the street from our office. It started as an egg company in 1920. Arthur later transitioned into growing chickens for meat, and he would sell them at live auction. It wasn't until 1968 we got our first processing plant. If you ever drive Ocean City through Salisbury, it's that plant right on Route 50. You can't miss it. You might smell it as you go along, just to be honest. In 1971, Frank decided to advertise and brand his chicken. Now that doesn't sound like a big deal, but in 1971 that was a big deal. Nobody had branded a commodity like chicken. And I'll tell you a story. When I was 13, my father, who was a minister in Salisbury, we were in the car and he stopped in front of this house and he said, "Son, Frank Perdue lives there." "Who's that, Dad?" He said, "Well, we need to watch this. This is so fascinating. This gentleman thinks he can create a brand of chicken and have people go into the store and ask for his brand of chicken. And it's just not been done before." And that's it. I've told that story a few times, and because it's interesting that I ended up spending most of my adult life there. In 2000, just moving down the line, we made the decision, a very strategic choice, to enter into the international commodities trading. Corn, soybeans, wheat, soybean meal, soybean oil, that sort of thing. And we did it by buying an operation in Chesapeake, Virginia. Now we ship anywhere from 150 to 200 vessels of ag commodities from the U.S. overseas, and we import 25 to 50 vessels coming in. A lot of those, though, come into the Port of Baltimore. Most of that is organic. We're the number one brand of organic chicken. We're the number one processor of organic chickens in America. And I'll touch on that in a minute. In 2007, we made another important choice. We launched our Harvest Land brand. We decided we wanted to learn how to grow chickens without using any antibiotics. Significant quantities of antibiotics are used in raising animals in the U.S., and a lot of them are used in chickens. We decided we were going to figure out how to do it without any. And I would say that was a very successful venture, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. In 2011, we made the decision, let's get in the organic chicken business. And then we had to decide, are we going to do it ourselves, or are we going to hire some expertise? So we went with the latter, and we bought this company called Coleman Natural Foods. And what we got with that was crummy assets, but some really smart people that knew that business. And that was a good move. 2015, we decided to get in the hog and cattle business. But we wanted to do it kind of our way. Animal care was important to us. We wanted to differentiate ourselves in that regard. We wanted the best quality. So we bought a company, the actual company name was Natural Food Holdings, which nobody's ever heard of. But the brand was Nyman Ranch. And that is one of the highest quality brands of pork and beef in the world today. We also grow a few lamb in that category. So go back to this no antibiotics ever thing. In 2016, on a Friday morning, we were sitting in our weekly, I was president of Perdue Foods at the time, and we were sitting in our Friday morning meeting, and I asked the question, can we convert 100% of our animals to no antibiotics? Do we know how to do that? And the live production and veterinarian team said, yeah, we figured it out. Good, we're doing it. And one of the accounts that really helped drive that was Chick-fil-A. They came to us and asked us, can we go no antibiotics ever? And we had it figured out. So I said, yes, we can. Well, how long would it take? Well, 2 years? I said, well, it's September, how about January? And they really like that. The market is out there. Interestingly, and I won't name names, one of our largest single competitor just decided to abandon no antibiotics ever. And I wanted to show you the commercial so bad, but I can't. But stay tuned. You'll like that. 2017, go back to agribusiness. We opened. Who's familiar with soybean processing and what that is? Okay, a pretty small one. Okay, soybeans. When you take a soybean and you process it, you get three things. You get meal. That's a high protein source. It's the primary protein source for animal nutrition. Then you get the oil. The meal is about 74% of the bean. The oil is about 19%. That's vegetable oil, which has to be refined. And then you get the hull, that's about 4%. And if that doesn't add up to 100, that's because there's a yield loss. So we opened up in southeast Pennsylvania the most environmentally responsible soybean plant ever. And I say it for two reasons. Number one, the air emissions are the lowest standard. Our permit forces us, but we want to be that way anyway. The lowest emission standards. But the other one, there's two things. Number one, those beans in Pennsylvania, most of them there's no big crush plants there, so they had to leave. So they go to the Midwest, or they might go down to the Mid-Atlantic. They get crushed. The meal, 74%, had to come back because there's a large animal ag business in Pennsylvania. So you're trucking it or railing it away, and you're trucking it back. Now they stay right there. The other thing is, the biggest single cost in soybean processing is the steam. We use about 80,000 pounds an hour of steam. So that means you have to burn something to create steam. Well, next door to us is a municipal incinerator, Lancaster County Solid Waste Management Authority. So they create steam, goes through a turbine, high pressure steam, makes electricity, and then the residual steam comes out at about 70 to 90 pounds PSI. It's exactly what we need. So we buy all our steam from them. So we're not burning any fuels to create our steam. And that was, I guess that was a commercial. Last thing I want to touch on just a couple of new products that we've launched here in the last few years because they're kind of, I don't know, they're a little different. Let me tell you about Simply Smart Organics. That's a line of fully cooked chicken products, and the genesis was, and this is a family story, but it's my family in this case. My daughter came to me and she said, Dad, I want to feed Austin, my oldest grandson. I want to feed him organic. I can't afford it. Is organic just for rich people? Well, that's a pretty interesting question. How do we make organic more affordable to more people? So we worked on that process, and it's not perfect, but we're getting there. And we launched Simply Smart Organic. And we priced it at what I would characterize as a surprisingly affordable retail price. It is now the #1 market share of organic chicken products in America. The other one was called Chicken Plus. Now, a few years ago, we were in a strategy meeting, and we said, these alternative proteins, plant-based, cultured, and I think it's broader than just cultured, but that category. We said, do we want to get in those businesses? And we made the decision, look, for now, we're not going to pursue the culture. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just such a small, tiny business right now. we'll hold off. But the plant-based we got to get into. So we went to the grocery store, and what we saw were dozens of brands already there. So if you're a branded company, you have to ask yourself, how do you make yourself different? So another Austin story. My wife and I are feeding him lunch one day, and he's eating his chicken nuggets dipped in ketchup, just as hard as he can. He's eating all his strawberries, and he's not touching his peas. And we looked and we thought, if we could put those peas inside that nugget, and he didn't know it, he'd be eating peas. That was the genesis of Chicken Plus. We call them stealth vegetables. And that business has gone very well. So, you're familiar with our brand, our TV commercials. I wanted to share with you 3 commercials, but from a historical perspective. The first one's from 1971. It's one of the very first commercials Frank Perdue ever did. In 1991, Jim took over the company. And in 1993, he became the television spokesperson. The way we did it was we had a transition from Frank to Jim. So there were a few commercials where they appeared together. And then eventually, Frank went away, and it was just Jim. And then most recently, we're beginning to transition from Jim as the spokesperson to his 2 sons, Chris and Ryan. So I'll just share with you 3 commercials. This works so well. Okay, so here's what happens. Ooh, did something happen?
They say everything tastes like chicken, but at Perdue, we believe when chicken is raised right, there's nothing like it. That's why we use all veggie feed and raise more organic chicken than anyone. We're on a mission for extraordinary chicken. Perdue, hungry for better chicken.
Well, obviously that's the new one. And I wish I could have showed you the other 2, but that's not going to happen. So my apologies.
They say.
And I can't blame the IT group because they had it perfect. It's operator error, I'm sure. Just a little bit about my background. You've heard about it, so I won't touch on it much. I did come here for my master's. I've had a dozen different jobs. For the students in the room who are thinking about their career, I'm not going to tell you what you should do. I'll just tell you what I did, and then you can decide what works for you. I went into the business world with the philosophy of, I'm on this team, I'll play the position they need me to play. I'll do the job they need me to do. I didn't say, well, I want to do that. I want this. I want this. I said, what do you need? And as a result, I moved around a lot. As a result, I learned a lot about the business. And obviously it worked well for me. And I would encourage you to decide, do you want to be on the team or not? I think the winners will be on the team. So what have I been? I retired July 12th. Had a big party that week, and it was great. Had a wonderful time. So what have I been doing? Well, on the upper right, that picture, that's my youngest son, who's a farmer. And we're sitting in the cab of his combine, and he lets me sit in the combine. I don't get to operate. And the bottom picture is my son and his wife and his 4 sons, who are all 4 and under. They are gluttons for punishment, aren't they? So I want to spend the balance of our time talking about some of the key challenges that agriculture faces today and in the future. It's not an all-inclusive list. It's the ones I said earlier I want to touch on. And I'll give you a heads up. I'm not going to take a strong position on these. I'm not going to say it should be this or that. You decide what you think. I want to remind you that you are the future of agriculture. I'm an old man. I'm not the future. You are the future. These challenges are ones you're going to have to pick up and run with and deal with. Study these issues, relying on the best science. If you hear me say science and facts a lot, it's because I think that's really important. Use the best science and facts to help guide civilization forward in how to deal with these issues. And I have a list here, and then there's a list on the next slide. And I'm going to give you one admonition. As you work on these issues, don't listen to the loudest voice. If Randy Day yells and screams and is the loudest voice, that's not a reason to listen to him. Don't listen to someone who has some agenda-driven rhetoric. Be scientists, be business people, be what you really are, and confront these issues head on. And here's the rest of the list. I wonder if I left off anything that someone had a burning passion to talk about. Too bad. So let's start with a conversation about agriculture in America. And the dean touched on this, and I've got just a different look at some of the numbers, but our message is the same. But first, let me do some surveys. First of all, do we all agree that we must and do eat? Okay, almost everybody. Somebody's on a diet. Can we all agree that the vast majority of what we eat comes from plants or animals that somebody raises? Okay. Now, let me ask you, how many of you raise 100% of the food you eat? Okay. 75%. Oh, wait, I got a 75 back there. 50%. Oh, I got a 50. Jimmy. She's not a plant. She really does. You know, our society has chosen to evolve dramatically in terms of food production, while at the same time our population continues to grow. So in 1820, so here's the question, and here's the answer. And you can read that. But so in 1820, there were about 11 million people in the U.S., and about 70% were engaged in production agriculture. That's 7.7 million people, roughly. 1920, there's 110 million people, and about 30% are involved in production agriculture. That's 33 million. Today, we have over 330 million, and let's say it's 2% are involved in production agriculture. That's about 7 million, less than 7 million people. That's less than were involved in 1820, and we're feeding 330 million people, plus exporting a lot. I think that's fascinating. That's a choice we made as a society. That's not a choice you made. That's not a choice Randy Day made. That's a choice our society has made. I think the question before us is, how will we provide the needed quantity of nutritious food to a growing population and see a more equitable distribution of that food around the world, which is obviously a very serious issue. My oldest son, who, everybody know my oldest son? He's the Secretary of Housing for the state of Maryland, on Governor Moore's cabinet. But he's also a major in the Army. And he spent 11 months in Djibouti. And he came home and he said, "Dad, the food we take for granted doesn't exist there." It's really, really heartbreaking. And he said, "I watched people fight over scraps of food and cardboard to build a shelter." We're very blessed in this country, and we need to know that. I'm sorry, that was a bit of a tangent lecture there. I think the real question is, how will you, as the future leaders of agriculture, address this issue? And the UN says the population is going to be greater than 9 billion in 2050. I think that's officially a lot of folks. You know, and I mentioned that. Just look at the chart. You don't even need the numbers, just the slope. Wow. And look where most of those people are. That's an important issue. And I don't know what you're going to do about it, but I hope you figure it out. So let's change the subject. Let's talk about climate change. I'd like to think we're beyond the debate of the reality of climate change. We see it in agriculture and its implications. You know, I have a close friend who has a farm in Dorchester County, Maryland. That's a pretty low-lying county on the Chesapeake Bay. We see not only visible rising water levels, but we also are seeing saltwater intrusion into the water table. And that is problematic, not to mention the changing weather patterns. You know, from a Purdue perspective, greenhouse gases are a key area of focus to us. And by the way, here on the front row is Drew Getty, who's our VP of Environmental Sustainability. So, glad you're here, Drew. Methane is a pretty onerous greenhouse gas. I think on the scale, it looks pretty ugly. You know, it's a byproduct of anaerobic decomposition. We have a lot of organic waste streams. All the landfills we have as a nation are a source of methane gases. We try not to talk about them because that's one of those inconvenient truths, I guess. But it's an important issue. We are pursuing, I'll just give kind of a Purdue plug here. We're pursuing managing these in two ways. One is composting. And the dean mentioned the compost operation that we built in Delaware, which we subsequently sold. However, we still send our organic waste streams there on a daily basis. So when you do that, you're composting them aerobically, so you're reducing carbon dioxide versus methane. The other thing is methane capture. So we have in some operations large anaerobic lagoons. They emit methane. We're capping those lagoons, capturing the methane, cleaning it up, and using it as a renewable fuel. Now, our business model, as an aside, is we don't put capital into those projects. It's not our expertise. We'd have to learn how to do it. We partner with companies who come in. They have the expertise. They put up the capital. They get to keep the gas. That's our trade. We get the environmental benefit. We feel good about ourselves, if nothing else. But we also get the carbon dioxide. So it's about, Drew, stop me if this is wrong, about 74%, 75% methane, about 20% carbon dioxide. We buy the carbon dioxide from that company and we use it as a refrigerant, dry ice, we compress it in our plants. So it's really kind of a neat reuse of resources. And we're going to continue. We have operations in Lewiston, North Carolina now, Cromwell, Kentucky. We're working on Accomack, Virginia, which is on the eastern shore of Virginia. And the company that bought our compost operation just got a permit to build a vessel anaerobic digester on that property, and we'll be sending more product there for methane generation and capture. By the way, if you want to see what one of these things looks like, everybody know where Jessup, Maryland is? Over by BWI? Right next to that, there is Bioenergy Devco's anaerobic digestion facility. It's a phenomenal operation. And I'd encourage you to go take a look at it. And there's a produce industry right around Jessup there. Started in around 1970, the state of Maryland built the produce market. They were generating about 180,000 tons a year of fruit and vegetable waste that went to landfill. Now, it all comes to bioenergy, converted to methane, and when you're done, it basically looks like dirt, soil amendment, and they're using compressed natural gas as a vehicle fuel. I'm changing the subject on you about every 5 to 7 minutes. I hope that's okay. You're a pretty smart group, so I'm sure you can keep up. Let's talk about nutrient management. This is one of the biggest sources of debate and concern in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And it has been in my 40 plus years in the business. So let's start with this. To grow things Animals or plants, nutrients are required. They're essential. Without them, we don't have life. However, we have a distribution challenge. Too much in any one place is a problem. And nutrient overload is one of a handful of key issues in the Chesapeake Bay. And by the way, I said I don't take strong positions on things in this talk. I'll just say this. As far as I'm concerned, the issues in the Bay are real. I think there's really can be no debate. Agriculture is one source of this issue. Unfortunately, it's gotten the vast majority of the attention. Suburban development, increasing runoff, failing septic, stormwater runoff, failing municipal wastewater treatment plants, what people put on their lawns, they don't get the same attention. I wonder why that is. Now I'm going to tell you some stories here. And this is where I said I might offend someone. I went to, it was about 2010, and a friend of mine in the EPA called and said, hey, there's a meeting at Chesapeake College, you should go. But you have to promise me you won't say anything. Boy, that was a tough one, but I promised. And I kept my promise. But here's what happened. So, an official got up and said, look, we're going to continue growth and development in the Baltimore-Washington corridor. As a result, we are going to increase the pollution that we create. We need the ag sector of the state to decrease their pollution to offset our increases. Now, for you folks associated with agriculture, how do you feel about that? Feel singled out a little bit? Some people getting a pass, others not. Now, I will say this, though. Oh, by the way, they created a nutrient credit trading program, so I personally filed to be a nutrient credit trader, because at that point in time, we had this business where we were buying poultry litter. You have to buy it. It's in short supply, contrary to what popular opinion would be. And we would pelletize it, pasteurize it, pelletize it, and make an organic fertilizer. Ship it all over. It went into like Scott's Miracle Grow, Espoma Hollytone. So I figured, well, we're picking up nutrients and shipping them out of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. We should be able to trade those credits. So I filed as a trader and I submitted for a trade, and they said, no, you can't do that. Well, why? Well, because it wasn't our vision that big ag people would do this. We just want small individual farmers to do it. A nutrient is a nutrient. Phosphorus is phosphorus. Just another interesting observation. This seemed to change recently, though, with the launch of the University of Maryland developed phosphorus management tool. This was, in my mind, the first time science entered into this conversation. There was a concern about the levels of phosphorus in the soil. There wasn't really much definitive data to demonstrate that, but there was a concern. So, led by the university, working with the state, an effort was made to measure in fields all over Maryland the amount of phosphorus in the soil. And most people felt like it would be 85, 90% saturated, so you can't put in more chicken. What they were after is don't put chicken in. Well, it came back, it was like 15%. A big disappointment for some and a big relief for others. Now, my youngest son, the farmer, hates it, period, because it ties his hands. But it's supposed to. It's good science. And as Dean Bayruti told me this morning, it's the best science we have so far. And maybe we'll get better. And I certainly trust his judgment. You know, another nutrient management issue is air emissions. And I'm going to tell you another story. So, during COVID, the issue came up about, there's a concern about air emissions from chicken houses and their impact on human health. So, Perdue the Keith Campbell Foundation, we offered to fund a study. Because I was curious. So they put up most of the money, 70%, I think we put 30%. And we set up testing stations all over. The only caveat was, I said, you have to put one in downtown Baltimore. So what did we learn? We learned that there was ammonia emissions. We learned that there was particulate matter. In all cases, it was below EPA thresholds. Okay. The worst station, you guessed it, was downtown Baltimore. So you know what they did? They got rid of that station. It doesn't exist anymore. I'm not sure that's good science. I'm not sure that's seeking improved human health. And if I've hurt anybody's feelings on that one, good. It's not my intent to hurt somebody's feelings. It's just I think these are important issues, and they need to be transparent. And you can rest assured, I picked up the phone and I called a lot of folks in Annapolis. I said, I'm going to email you the results. You should have them in your hands. You're going to go into a meeting, a committee meeting, and we're going to talk about this. I want to make sure you have all the data. And that was powerful. And I won't tell you who I sent it to because I just won't. Again, I encourage you to be scientists in dealing with these issues. Truth, science, facts will lead us to real, viable solutions. So let's talk about animal care. Perdue raises a lot of animals. We've recognized in our 103-year history that we have a responsibility to provide for the welfare of the animals in our care. I think you would expect nothing less of us. It's a fundamental part of our business, and it has been a journey of continuous improvement. These numbers, 13 million, that's our weekly chicken harvest. 100 million, that's how many chickens are on the ground at any point in time. 650 million, that's our annual harvest. Those are all birds. And we're the fourth or fifth largest, so we're by no means the largest chicken company. We also raise turkeys, hogs, cattle, and lamb. I mentioned that. Earlier this month, we hosted our 8th annual Animal Care Summit. This is really different. We get together animal rights activists. So Compassion and Moral Farming is there. Mercy for Animals is there. Humane Society of the United States, Farm Forward. We invite them in. We have dinner with them. We provide a vegetarian alternative. We bring Perdue associates, academia, farmers, and customers. And I said earlier, and I'll say it again, the farmers are important because all of our animals are raised on family farms and ranches. And I think that's really, it's important we understand that. These are families raising these animals. You know, the best, in all these years, when I created the Animal Care Summit 8 years ago, we didn't have a farmer panel the first year, but we started after that. The farmer panel is the big hit. These are people who are, they might be third or fourth generation on this farm. And this is what they do. They might grow corn and beans, they grow vegetables, and they also grow chickens. The farm I worked on as a kid outside of Easton, Maryland, was 300 acres of vegetables and 4 chicken houses. I can tell you there's nothing more labor intensive than that combination. We talk in these meetings about our efforts and our plans. We compare notes, and we've become, in a lot of cases, friends. And I think that's very helpful. So how this all began, let me tell you that story. 2016, there was an undercover video. It was a farm raising chickens for Perdue in North Carolina. The farmer for whatever reason, he invited Compassion and Moral Farming on. He closed the chicken house up. He turned the fans off. It was 95 degrees outside, and he let them suffocate. And they videotaped it. And then, of course, the undercover video said, look, this is what Perdue does. So we got together, oh my gosh, it's on the internet, so the world can see it. What are we gonna do? And we came up with our responses and we managed to. Not long after, another one came out. This time it was Mercy for Animals on another farm in North Carolina. This one was hard to watch. They're all hard to watch, but there was an employee of the farm that was killing the chickens by stomping them to death. Not a pretty picture. And so we got a group together. What do? And one of our leaders, Mark McKay, said, Randy, did we know this was happening? I said, well, no, because if we did, we would have done something about it. He said, then why don't we call that animal rights group and say, thank you for making us aware? And I said, what you would have said, wonderful idea, I will not call them, you will call them. So we did. And what we heard the next day in a publication was, this has never happened before. Big Ag thanks the Animal Rights Group for exposing animal abuse. To me, that was somewhat of an epiphany. But wait a minute, maybe we avoid each other like the plague. We want nothing to do with each other. Maybe we should change that. Maybe we should maybe we should sit down and talk to people we disagree with. A novel idea. So we just had our 8th Animal Care Summit. We had over 40 customers there from Whole Foods, Sprouts, Walmart, ShopRite. And it was wonderful. I think it's a great thing that we're going to keep doing. I talked about our No Antibiotics Ever journey and how from 2002 we started, 2016 we went 100%, no antibiotics ever. And the 2 big places that really impacts, first it's in the egg. So we vaccinate the egg, the embryos in the egg. So that means we poke a little hole through the shell and we add the vaccine. Now, you've created a vector for bad things to get in there. If that shell's not really clean, that bacteria can get in there. So one of the things we had to learn is we got to keep these eggs super clean. It made a world of difference. And then there's the things we're doing on the farm. There's 20 things there, so I won't go through them, but we learned a lot. It wasn't just a hope and a prayer. We actually changed our processes. For the animals, this means we had to figure out how to eliminate antibiotics. That meant we had to learn, we used antibiotics as a crutch for poor management. By eliminating the need for antibiotics, we elevated the welfare of the animals. And for people, what does this mean? It means antibiotic resistance is addressed, is confronted. And I mention that because 80% of the antibiotics in the U.S. are used in animal ag. Got that from the Food and Drug Administration. Most of them go in pigs and chickens. Antibiotic resistant bacteria. I have 7 plus 4, a blended family. I got 11 grandchildren. I love them. If they need an antibiotic, I want it to work. And you feel the same way. So that's why it's our challenge to address this issue. All right. Let's talk about food safety for a minute. Critically important issue. In the 1990s, I was VP of Quality and R&D for the company. I, along with other folks in the industry, sat down with the parents, some of the parents, who lost children to that E. coli 15787 issue in Jack in the Box hamburgers. I wasn't doing any business with Jack in the Box, but I'm a part of the meat industry. So I sat down with those parents and let them vent and to hear what they had to say. I've got children and grandchildren. I get it. It's not good. In 2003, I met with the CEO of Walla Fruit Juice. You recall that issue? They were selling unpasteurized fruit juice, and they had several children die of Listeria monocytogenes. And now this CEO, I'll give him credit. He went to every funeral. took his lumps. And then he came to Harvard Business School, to the Ag Business seminar that is held annually, and I was there. And he had blasted a lot of us over the years. So he had to stand in front of us and say, you know, I was wrong. I made a mistake. I decided pasteurization. Louis Pasteur was on the right track. It was tough, and I give him credit for it. Nonetheless, children died. Food safety is an important issue. And you know, this is basic microbiology, but remember this, if it's food to you, it's food to them. I'm talking about the bad bugs. So why are they on our food? It's because it's their food too. We can never forget that. That's basic biology. These graphs illustrate 3 of the most serious pathogens and where they come from. Take a look at those items on the right. Is that just chicken, beef, pork? No, it's all food. That's why it's important we recognize. If it's food to you, it's food to them. We have to manage all of the food chain. I guess I just expressed a strong opinion, didn't I? Yeah. I challenge you in the future to be fact-based scientists. If we don't focus on the problem and accept the realities, we risk letting people get sick. New subject, genetically modified food. This is like, I gave a talk at a college once, and I talked about genetically modified, and I did not take any position at all. And afterwards, I came off the stage, and a reporter came up to me, this lady, and I mean, angry. I could see it in her eyes. She was mad. This was October 2016. And she said, how dare you not take a position in opposition to genetically modified foods? Did you ever get in a situation where after it's over, you think of what you should have said? This was the one time in my life I actually thought of what I should say at that point in time. So I said, look, the USDA, the FDA, the National Academy of Sciences have all proclaimed genetically modified foods as safe. These are all branches of the federal government. They report into the executive branch, which is led by the President of the United States. If the President of the United States in October 2016 has declared these foods as safe, who am I to question his judgment? Think about that. But there are concerns that we know of today. Roundup Ready beans and corn, which I'm working around every day with my son now. Well, there's nothing wrong with those. There's no danger that we know of. But we are spraying a lot of herbicides, glyphosates. Is there an elevated concern with the use of glyphosates? That's where the scientists have to go and help us understand what the risks are. And by the way, 94% of the soybeans grown in America and 92% of the corn are genetically modified. It is a big deal. And by the way, on this subject, genetically modified has been a game changer in ag. How did 2% grow enough food for everybody else? This is not the answer, this is one of the answers. Back in 1900, corn was 25 bushels an acre. Today, that number's wrong. It's 175 bushels an acre. Beans, 15 to 45. So it's been a big deal. Is it the genetic modification? No, that's a big part of it, but it's not the only thing. And I have one more subject. Organic demand. I told you we're the largest organic chicken processor in the country. By the way, the largest plant is in Milford, Delaware. They're doing 1 million organic chickens a week. And we grow those chickens on the northern part of Delmarva and in southeast Pennsylvania. A lot of that organic feed is coming in from Argentina and the Black Sea because we can't get enough in the U.S., and I talked about that earlier. We're not a dominant player. We're the largest, but we're not dominant. There's a lot of people in this game. There's two things to grow this business we have to address. We got to have more supply of organic feed ingredients. I don't know how to solve that yet, but that is something we have to solve. We have to convince farmers somewhere in this world that we need more. And by the way, what we buy overseas is certified by the USDA. So they send people over and they make sure it's all good. And there are always people trying to scam the system, and we have to stay vigilant. The second thing is we got to lower the cost somehow. You know, corn today sells for $5 a bushel. Organic corn is $13 a bushel today. Markets change all the time, but that's the ratio. Soybean meal, conventional 400, organic 1200. That's where the cost differential is. That's why organic is so expensive. That's what we have to tackle as an agricultural industry. Okay, look, I talked a long time, probably a little longer than I was supposed to, but I love talking about this. It's so important, and you've paid tremendous attention. Nobody fell asleep, but I can see that. So thank you for this opportunity and your time and attention.